Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Community Economic Development Committee meeting. I am John Weddleton.
I'm Pete Peterson.
Ryan Yell, Planning Partners.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Christopher Concept Assembly.
Amy Stormeyer, legal assistant.
We've been going around with everything.
We have.
We might as well start with Chris.
Chris Schutte, Office of Economic Community Development.
Phil Steyer, GH Electric.
Sharon Ferguson, Planning Department.
Chris Lesher, RC Community.
Valerie Winsler, paralegal for General Team. Kim Cole, Raspberry Roots.
James Thornton, Secret Right.
Ron Thompson, Scope and Permitting Engineer. Bruce Schulte, Elizabeth.
Justin Rowland, VGF, and Einstein.
Francis McLaughlin, current planning.
All right, thanks. So we'll go through 3 applications. I think all of you have been here before. So what we do is when we hit them, go ahead and sit up here if it's your issue, and then we'll talk somewhat amongst the assembly members and staff. And if you want to speak, just raise your hand and we'll point to you. Try not to just jump in. You'll get a chance to respond. So don't worry about that. Just starting out, as I pulled into the driveway, on the radio it said that Jeff Sessions expects to rescind the coal memo today, which will be interesting for our industry. But we'll continue with the meeting just the same. So, first up is Raspberry Roots. Mandy, you wanna?
Yeah. So this is Raspberry Roots for their manufacturing license. With this application, all of the license restrictions are addressed in the operating plan. There was no taxes, fees, or fines found due by any licensees or affiliates. They have 2 other proposed licenses. They're separated to overlapping premises. All of the security and restricted access requirements have been addressed. There were no additional conditions recommended for the license.
All right, thank you. And it's Sean, or Ryan, you can do it? Or?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It is Sean's case, but I'll be presenting on his behalf today. So this is a request for a manufacturing facility license and special use permit for Raspberry Roots. The facility is proposed to be located at 501 Raspberry Road in the Tuckerton Community Council. Public notices were mailed out on November 28th with no comments received. Marijuana manufacturing facility is proposed in the I-1 district. This facility will be operating in conjunction with previously approved marijuana cultivation facility and an approved marijuana retail facility within the same building. There's 706 square feet of planned manufacturing space within the site, and the applicant is being meaningfully engaged with the community throughout the application process and has provided a memorandum of understanding between the applicant and the Tuckerton Community Council. And the planning department has reviewed the application, and staff has determined that the applicant is generally in compliance with municipal code and recommends approval with the attached conditions.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's great to see Kim back here again. It's been probably a little over a year, huh? So, have you have the industrial hygienist lined up, or have they already been by, or?
So we have not purchased any of the actual equipment yet, and so once that equipment is purchased, installed, then they can come in and inspect it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
It seemed like when you came by before, there were some people opposed. Your neighbors, Morning Lights, and someone else. And then
Morning Lights was concerned about parking. And I'm talking to, I got the number for somebody across the street at NSTAR. And so, first of all, we have 17 spaces out front, and I'm going to talk to the NSTAR to see if we can rent spaces across the street for our employees, freeing up more for customers.
Have you filled up all your parking after? Has that been an issue?
It hasn't been so far. We've had enough parking for our employees, but we haven't opened retail yet. So.
We haven't opened your retail.
No, the cultivation is up and running. The retail is being built out.
And I'm just curious on the timing. So you put in with the state for this in July of 2016.
Yes.
So now we're a year and a half later.
Yes.
And that was just your choice, or is that just how long it takes?
Well, between uni issues, money issues, sometimes it takes a while, especially when you are trying to balance 3 different licenses.
make sure that we're not throwing stuff in front of you. And then I had one almost critical thing is you were gonna be making something called Moose Turd.
Yes.
I think they're Moose Nuggets. So it's a marketing thing. Then just, for the rest of it, I mean, I'm sure we've read the packets, but we'll be talking later about, some issues with the floor plan and security and so on. I mean, it's been somewhat of an issue for a while, where you guys are putting your whole floor plan out, and where those
Through the
cameras
state.
are and so on.
Yeah.
And that's the state does what they do, but, you know, I was looking at your, I mean, are you nervous about having that out there? Do you have any, your floor plan and your?
I would
security
prefer
system?
that it not be posted publicly, absolutely. I mean, I don't know any cannabis business across the state that wants their floor plan and their cameras to be publicly noticed. So if you guys wanna mention to the state to pull all that stuff down, 2 thumbs up.
Well, we can't, we probably will, but we'll be looking later when we look at some amendments. I don't know if you saw we're looking at revising some of the rules. None of it would make it harder to do anything, but looking at some changes to get some of that lease off of our system where it wouldn't be impacted. Might stick around a while after that.
Did you guys happen to watch the video of Danish Gardens being robbed on TT? The actual video of them
I
entering the
saw what was
facility?
on the news.
They knew exactly,
Right.
and I don't mean like they were messing around or if it was like even questionable. They knew exactly where that product was. They were in and out. It took them 10 minutes to get in,
Yeah.
but once they were in, they knew exactly where they
Well,
were.
stick around, because that'll be on, that's our item, part of item 3, be talking about that, 'cause that is very important. So. Okay, anything else?
Well, just to channel Ms. Dembowski, what is the closest protected use, Brian? Is it half mile?
There were complaints that it was way too close to a school.
Yeah,
Like far.
yeah, exactly, I remember that, and I don't think there was any protected use nearby, but, you know.
It's, unfortunately not listed in the, staff packet, but, from my recollection, I think the nearest facility is 1,000 feet away.
So the nearest school is almost 2,000 feet away, and the reason that was such a big deal was because the principal there did a robocall to
Yeah.
all of her parents,
Yeah.
asking them to come and protest the license. So that's the reason why that probably stuck in your head,
Yeah.
because she was told to cease and desist by the school district.
So, is that the closest, is there no church between there and there? Okay, thank you, so this is.
I have that ready for Tuesday.
Someone's gonna.
Yeah, I'll make sure.
Okay,
That's it.
do we have a recommendation?
I support this, I move to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay. So, you know, so we'll recommend on Tuesday that this committee recommended approval, and then we'll vote, so we'll see how she goes.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, next up is Einstein and Green. I think, let's go ahead and do them separately, but it's all on here. So Ryan, or I'm sorry, Mandy, do you have?
So this is, a major modification of the special land use permit, so it's purely Ryan's.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the first major modification of a marijuana special use permit that's going before the Assembly. Modification of previously approved special use permit for a marijuana manufacturing facility within an I-1 district. This special use permit was previously approved by the Assembly on November 15th, 2016. And the Assembly resolution number on that was 2016-313 as amended. The licensed premises encompasses 874 square feet of manufacturing space. The requested modification will increase the overall licensed square footage by 640 square feet, a 73% increase. The final licensed premises square footage will be 1,514 square feet. It appears that the parking requirement for all uses on site is met. However, traffic engineering has requested stamp parking calculations to confirm this. The requirement to provide stamp parking calculations shall be added as a condition of approval. A reinspection of the licensed premises shall be required as a condition of approval. The extent of the manufacturing space is increasing substantially, and thus a reinspection is necessary to ensure compliance with the submitted plans.
Chairman. So we've been doing these for a while, and I don't remember hearing the phrase stamped parking before.
I haven't either.
Can we get a definition of what the heck that is?
Stamp parking calculations are essentially a verification of the square footage that's done by the architect, and they state each use that's within the building, and they say, I've got manufacturing, it's 1 for 400, I need this many spaces. I've got, say you're in a strip mall, you've got an office complex, you have a dentist office, and you'll split that out by each use, and do that parking calculation, and typically it's included in the site plan.
So there's a site plan, I'm assuming that Falconberry did do this parking assessment somehow, he just didn't include it with the plan. Falconberry was on vacation before this meeting got wrapped up, so he's back now, it shouldn't be an issue just to have him submit it.
And what's the, for manufacturing, is it 1 per 1,000 or something?
1 for 400.
1 per 400, okay, so you have to get a couple more.
I have plenty, I think I have 17 there, and I think I only need 15, so I should have plenty of parking.
Mr. Chair, Francis has a comment.
Sorry, I'm sitting out of view. So stamped is just a term that we commonly use. A surveyor or a architect's stamp is significant because then it puts their licensure on the line.
Oh, I see.
The stamped is something that's significant. If you have an unstamped plan, then it doesn't sort of put them on the hook sort of legally or ethically the way, it just means more to us to see it stamped. Does that make sense?
Yep.
If that's your question.
I got the understanding now, thank you.
This conversation once again highlights the interest that I have in having some analysis performed on parking utilization for these licensees that's by the department or a contractor of the department, so that we can assess what actual functional parking needs are as opposed to the ideal functional parking needs that the planning department says we need. Because there's a lot of concern made for licensees that you have to have all this parking, moths are gonna come and it's gonna be the end of the world for parking, and it's not shown up, right? And there haven't really been parking conflicts, and so it would be great at some point, I just want on the record that we do go back and conduct an analysis of the actual parking needs relative to these businesses, as opposed to the extreme high needs.
Put it on your to-do list.
Well, Mr. Chair, the planning department does have some say in that, but ultimately it's the call of the municipal traffic engineer to decide those parking calculations. So if the committee wishes to request that, they have to request that through the municipal traffic engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'd have to come up with a different formula or something? Or how do you go about changing that?
The traffic department does have standard procedures for doing parking analysis and parking studies. Exactly each criteria that's involved in that, I'm unclear on at this point, but they do have standard procedures that they run through where they essentially, visit a site at different times of the day, see exactly, how many people are there, how does the business operate, how much time is a customer or occupant at the facility for. Just based upon observations from them, they haven't done any formal studies, but they've concluded thus far that the parking department is working outside of sales days. They haven't seen any major backups or major overflows of parking.
So maybe at some time we'll have that conversation.
We can do, I'd say that when we rewrote the Title 21 a while ago, Tom Davis and I think Bob People, and so we did, so to the planning department went out to a huge amount of time, counting empty spaces and so on, and revised the parking requirements based on that. I mean, I'd say sometimes we're pretty new in this industry too, if you get even half a dozen more businesses, you've increased it a significant percentage, so, and that may drop it lower, so I think someday, but at this point, it hasn't been, we've only had like 2 cases, we're really up against the problem.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we need to dedicate a lot of time to it, I'm just putting it out there that is an issue that I think at some point we should consider. Francis back here.
No, you didn't.
Mr. Chair, I am an architect licensed in several states. One of the interesting facets of this discussion, and it's like a question for traffic engineers, is many of these licensees are operating on shifts. They're working around the clock, and a lot of jurisdictions don't take that into account with their parking calculations. So I think that would be a legitimate question to bring up with the traffic engineer and with the licensees to see, what is the distribution of your parking demand throughout the day? Just a thought.
Yeah, so the planning department, after the adoption of the new code, we have parking calculations, parking requirements based on use types. And then when the rules were written by the department on marijuana, it was discovered once we had done that, we're designating the 4 types of marijuana licenses as new use types. And so we had to, then the ripple effect, because it was a new use, because we were just assuming that it would, like the retail license would fall under the retail use parking requirement. The manufacturing marijuana license type would fall under the general manufacturing parking requirement. But then because it's its own separate use type in the table, we had to then go and create a section and attach a parking requirement to each one of those license types, and then we just followed what was sort of logical. So, a retail business, we just applied the same parking calculation for retail. For manufacturing, same. Cultivation, I don't know if we use commercial horticulture, but we just used the same sort of stuff. And that's all that was done, and that was sort of trusting the parking requirements that have been recently adopted. Now, beyond that, if a business can prove up that the standard parking requirement is more than they need, then they can prove up and request a parking reduction. So if they say our retail is not going to use 1 per 350 to 3 or 300, whatever the requirement is, then they ask for a reduction, and they provide science-based information on that. Well, these other businesses only utilize this many parking spaces at peak times, these 3 times, and then they check that. The traffic department does a drive-by to verify there's photographs done, these parking reductions. And so, if the parking requirement is deemed to be too high, then the traffic engineer has the ability to reduce the requirement based on that site-specific request. So that's what we have, the system.
I just want to say briefly, our parking standards are based on national standards. So they look at, okay, this is an office building, there's a formula that will allow you to look at. If you've got a high school, there's a national formula for figuring out how many parking spaces you have. And on down the line from retail to almost any type of use, hotels, how many parking spaces we look at. So we're following a national standard. Hope that helps.
Or maybe they're wrong.
New business, nationally not legal.
I think the question is what you asked, stamped parking plan. That's not terminology that we use in building. It's a stamped site plan that is approved by the building department and then subsequently giving to this special land use permit. So it'd be better to see terminology as a stamped site plan to match everything else that we do, and then go do that. But the other thing on parking, reductions is defined in code, tells you how to do it, what to do, what to provide traffic. It's the same thing for what he said on shared parking. It's in there as well. You can do a shared parking calculation analysis and take it to the traffic engineer at any time too. So both those processes are defined in code, pretty easy to process or go through that. I don't think that's the issue. The standard seems to be fair too. I mean, it's the same as every other business, which makes sense. But in this case, I'm with you in the sense that it's weird to hear different terminology. So what we don't want to do in the industry is start seeing new terminology requirements on a special license different than what everybody else is doing. So I'd rather see it say, must get us a approved site plan approved through the municipality like every other project, including all of the marijuana businesses. And this seems like a different terminology than we normally use.
We will be talking about nuances of terminology on your whole business, so stick around.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but in this particular situation, I do not need a parking assessment.
Well, you have a site plan already. Yes, you
Stay
have to go through a change of use for this new additional square footage that involves and includes an additional approved site plan, which means that we have to redo the calcs, we have to do the site, we have to submit it to the city just like we did before. But all that terminology is in there. I don't think it needs to say special stamped parking, that's all.
We're getting a good.
We are straying
When
just a bit.
we're straying here, what is missing is parking calculations from the site plan. We have a site plan, it's building dimension, it's.
So
you go.
parking
I have
does not
parking
need to be
calculations.
stamped then.
I
So-
think what Ryan was trying to do is just bring up the fact that it was the parking that needed to be analyzed.
Correct.
But the
If
word
that's done-
stamped is the problem. And just say, we don't do stamps.
So I'm also super confused here. I have non-conforming rights grandfathered in for this property, so I don't see why we're even talking about any parking or landscaping or snow calculations or anything like that.
That's a separate thing, non-conforming rights. Justin does have non-conforming rights for a lack of a few parking spaces. However, he doesn't have non-conforming rights for no parking. So parking still has to occur on site. We need to know that he has that parking for all these on site.
And you could, I'm trying to think how it works, but if you have non-conforming rights for having 4 fewer parking spots, you might switch to a use where you could still have to find another one at some point if you had a.
Correct.
Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
So,
Yes.
so it doesn't free you up completely from.
Well, in this case, manufacturing has been calculated as 1 per 1,000. Same with his grow operation, which is in the same building as 1 per 1,000. So he's taking 1 per 1,000, switching it out with 1 per 1,000. So it should be a wash and it's a non-issue. But it should be defined and depicted and shown correctly there. But I think what Justin is worried about is the same thing. We don't usually submit for any project stamped parking calculations. They are done by non-licensed architects. They're done by regular people on the street for every project. And so, again, the terminology is we're putting in a special increased requirement on this to say stamped when we agree with doing the parking.
Ron, when a licensed architect does a site plan, is there a parking analysis done at that time?
Yeah.
And are they stamping the site plan?
It doesn't, they stamp the site plan, it doesn't mean the calculations are stamped on the drawings or in the file. They're just submitted.
I can tell you that I see site plans that have parking
Yeah.
calculations all the time.
I do too, but what I'm saying is the code doesn't require that, and we do it at the counter all the time with it, when the architect doesn't do it. That's all I'm saying. Yes, it's done, some people do it, some people don't. What I'm saying is, when you put a requirement on, then all of it, suddenly that becomes the norm. And that's the problem that I have, and that's what Justin is saying. Just do me the same as everybody else. I'll provide the parking counts, I'll submit that, but when you say the term stamped, that's not what is the practice in the industry in all cases. It's just, some people do, some people don't.
So, question for a second, why, because you do calculations, you'll look at their site plan.
What we do is typically verify that their calculations are correct, so, if it's done by a licensed architect or engineer and there's analysis done, we will go through and do the same analysis to verify that their calculations are correct.
So it sounds like just a wording thing, so it's almost, instead of.
It is, I mean,
Stamp site plan showing adequate parking, is that what you're?
We're getting a bit, like Ryan said, straight, but I think that we can work that out. I mean, whether it's a stamped site plan or a stamped parking plan, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. As long as we end up at the same point, we're fine.
So I guess I'm still confused because you have a stamped site plan right now.
Does it have a parking analysis done on it?
No, but that's what Ron's saying is it's not required to be on there. As long as you have a stamped site plan, at some point the calculations were done.
Yeah, but what we're trying to do is verify that, so what we want to know is, has there been an analysis done of the parking? And if so, show us the numbers so that we can verify it. That's all we're asking.
I gotcha.
And it's often shown on a site plan. Like this morning, I'm reviewing an alcohol special land use permit case, and the site plan that was provided to me for this distillery has the parking calculation up in the corner of the site plan. So I just go and check it, and it specifies, because it's a big building with all these different units, and it breaks down each unit, the square footage of each use type. It's a parking calculation on the site plan. It's great because it's all in one spot on the site plan. It's not a separate sheet of paper. Thomas did a great job, and it's just right there. And
Thomas did his site too, and he didn't put it on there, so that's what I'm saying.
Just ask him to
It's
throw it
not
on
always
there.
done.
Ron, wait, let's, a point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wasn't trying to stir anything up by bringing this stamp parking phrase up. I've read 50 or 60 or 80 of these or whatever it is, and I'd never seen that phrase before, so it stuck out like a sore thumb, so that's why I was asking about it.
No, I think, Ron, we're not trying to ask for, a bunch of information here. We're not asking Justin, we're not asking you to go, well beyond what you've already gone. We're just asking for some parking lots.
So I guess, my question would be then is, do I need, once he puts the site or the parking calculations on there, do I have to actually go back and get a stamp from the city then?
No,
Or can I just literally bring in parking calculations and just hand that to you?
The stamped is your architect's stamp.
Okay.
And then it will go through a review process with the city and we'll approve it.
Okay.
So what I think I'm hearing, just to be clear, is that the term stamp site plan is kind of a loose term, that the actual engineering term is a site plan that addresses parking with the stamp on it from an engineer, and we're asking for an updated site plan that has parking calculations addressed on it. That's what I'm hearing here.
I think that's.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that comports with keeping in line with every other requirement.
So this sounds like we've straightened what we have on this issue, but when we get into 175 here, we'll talk about the site plan and do you need to show the rooms? And I'm guessing, anyway, so this is a tie-in. Again, you show your floor plan very carefully. Do you have qualms about that?
Absolutely I do. Yeah, I would rather not at least the sensitive areas, at least the cameras, at least the product storage room, at least the quarantine room, at least like sensitive areas, where product's gonna be, like, I don't necessarily mind showing necessarily the floor plan of the building. If we could redact the whole thing, I would redact the whole thing.
Okay, well, stick around.
Perfect.
Because we had some discussion on that. There was on page 27, there's an APD incident report. There were like 2 incidents.
So we've had, I think, 5 or 6 false alarms now. With the state, we put in an update that we would all carry panic buttons, and you lean over a counter, you pick up a tray, you do anything just side, and it's an instant call. Panic buttons, there's not 30 seconds to run to the alarm and get it shut off. It is call the cops now, they are on their way, and I think there's been 5 or 6 of them. So we've switched, actually we were using single button panic buttons, and I've switched them all over to dual button panic buttons, so that now they have to at least press 2 buttons to activate that panic button. Because yeah, I don't like the $500 charge that goes with it either.
Okay. Okay, well, that's good to know then. So it was accidents, you didn't have to break it?
No, not just accidents.
There's a neighbor.
DGF is still under construction. One of those actually was a contractor that tripped the alarm one day because the building is still under construction. But the other 4 or 5 has been employees.
A neighbor was opposed? Somebody owns a building nearby. Did you see that? Have you talked to your neighbors?
All the neighbors that I've talked to, Linden, NRC, 6 Robley's, I've all had good relationships with over the last year, and good feedback from them. I believe on the original application we had the same guy probably on the original one last year when we went through the assembly in July. I believe there was one complaint. It's probably the same guy.
Marshall Sims.
That sounds right.
So you contacted him?
I have not. The guy actually doesn't live here. He owns property here, but he doesn't actually live here. He just saw the public notice go out.
So he did call the clerk's office to ask about this, and we explained to him that it's no change to the outside of the facility. It's going to be a change to the inside of the facility, so it's not going to affect anything on the outside portion. It's just increasing the space of the row. So he did call and ask about it, and he said he was just against it altogether. So.
Well, it's good to reach out to these guys,
For sure.
Okay. Good, and your recommendation?
Move to approve.
Second that, okay. So.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I just realized that you might have a quorum issue. You have 3 views. how many members here this morning? I think 6, I'm counting 4.
We need 4? Okay.
Well, but I think, Dean, that we could say that it was unanimous among the members present, and that's a good enough statement for the body, because we aren't taking an official action here.
Well, you can't be taking official action.
Exactly.
You can say what you want.
I think that's a better statement.
Don't they typically just make recommendations to the assembly anyways on these?
The chair can say we didn't have a quorum, we had a discussion, the members presenting recommended approval, so it just wouldn't be an official action.
Okay, we'll do, thank you. Okay, so somewhat similar, perhaps briefer, is Dream Green Farm. Same players.
That was mine. So for Dream Green Farms, it's in the same building as the case we just discussed, Einstein Labs. It's also a request for a major modification to a previously approved special land use permit for a marijuana cultivation facility within an I-1 district. The requested modification will increase the overall licensed square footage by 4,495 feet. Although 780 square feet will be removed to reallocate space for tenant B and for their Arctic entry. The requested modification will increase the overall licensed square footage by 4,346 square feet, 800% increase approximately. The additional cultivation area will occur on the second floor of the building. And as I mentioned earlier, it's in the same building as Einstein Labs. And as for the conditions, resolve the number of required parking spaces with the planning department, resolve the design of the parking lot with the traffic department, and it depends on the successful passage of a final inspection. And they need to submit a detailed second floor plan.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments? Couple questions. One is just a detailed second floor plan. What kind of detail?
Well, if you look in your packet, I don't have, my pages aren't numbered, but it's this page.
You know, it's like 33 maybe.
Right, and there's not much detail on that page compared to what they submitted earlier as of something like this, and that's the detail we're looking for, something along those lines.
So I think 6 is the detail.
Yeah.
So that right there is the detailed drawing for second floor. So right there, you already have it.
Okay, is this, you have nothing more than this, is this what you've submitted? Okay.
That's it. That's the second floor.
No other partitions in these rooms? Okay.
So going on that, are we looking at page 6 or 7?
6.
Okay, 6 has just the general. So this is the second floor here, and it's all. So why would you need interior layout?
Because we want to see what's there and what's the actual uses. Is it a flower room? Is it a break room? Is it a bathroom? And without getting the detail, we don't know what the space is being used for. Is it cultivation, or is it other uses like a break room, an office? But if we just have a second floor plan and they just show, as it did on the other one, just a colored, the one I showed you first, then we don't know what that space is being used for.
Would that make a difference? How? I mean, the parking calculation, a break room is cultivation.
Yeah, so John, you and I had a discussion last week about this, and I think generally speaking, what we need is, we need to be able to identify the uses that are gonna be in different areas of the structure, for parking, calculation purposes. Beyond that, I don't think we need any additional information. For example, if it's a nursery or it's a processing room or something like that, if if it's all being calculated as cultivation, then all we need to know is that that area is cultivation. We don't care about the fact that that's a nursery or a budding room or whatever it may be. We just need to know that generally speaking, it's cultivation.
Right.
So when Sharon says detailed site plan, I think what she really means is a little bit more detail beyond what was presented, not necessarily detailed to the level of identifying every possible thing that's in there.
I think that's been what we've been seeing, but partly it's just copied from the state.
Correct.
And the state
Yeah.
requires.
And I think we're gonna have a conversation about
Okay. I'm doing this as like pre.
Yeah.
I did notice there was an error, so I will correct that error, but all of my rooms are multi-purpose growing rooms, so that anytime if I wanna switch to another room, or switch to a veg, or switch to bloom, they're all.
And Justin, we don't care about that at all. All we
But
really want to
it's listed though, it's just
Yeah.
the one is listed as storage, so I just need to make a small correction on there for you guys. That is multi-purpose, but I see what you're after.
And then, Karen, I'm a little confused at 780 foot. Some of that switched over to what we just looked at.
Yes, on the first floor, they previously had been doing cultivation there, but now they're turning it over to tenant B and adding taking some of the space to use for an Arctic entry. So that won't be calculated as part of their cultivation because it's going now to other uses on the first floor.
Tenant B is.
Yes.
Same old.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they're taking the second floor of the building and devoting it to cultivation.
Okay. Questions?
That was the plan all along. I think, when we did the tour over there, you were telling us that you were gonna be doing that, so this really isn't a big surprise to me.
Saying it's when I was where the building and saw this space previously, I was told, this was 6 months ago, that it would be dedicated to growing at some point in the future.
I've been on that tour as well.
Sean?
I think with Justin, I think the question here is, you have the same site, you're answering the same questions and the same type of things to two different people and get two different kind of requirements come back. And I think it'd be nice to have consistency where the same kind of thing is worked together, the same person that knows the site's already doing the one piece as the second piece, and helps consistently provide one answer to both. It's one site, it's one building. It just kind of is a little bit different to be continuously answering one question here and then going over here and answering for the same exact site.
Well, it did seem odd. I mean, it seemed,
Well,
generally we've seen one person do something similar, but I could discuss split up.
Yeah, I mean, this really has to do with the allocation of resources here in our office. So Ryan handles the vast majority of all the marijuana stuff. Unfortunately, Ryan can't handle everything. Ryan is also doing other things. So I agree with you, Ron. It would be best to do it that way. Unfortunately, in this particular case, it wasn't possible. So my apologies, and Justin, I'm sorry if you had to communicate several times, but certainly that's our intent. It's just not possible in every situation.
Okay, do we have a approval or? Yeah. Sorry. Okay, lack of a quorum, but we'll recommend. We'll let the group know that without a quorum.
All right.
Three of us. Thank you.
Thanks,
Stick
Ron.
around. Okay, so, summary of marijuana modification. Is this fine? This is, look at it there.
Yes, correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So this is, there is a requirement in code that all decisions that are minor modifications that are approved by the director, that the planning department has to provide a quarterly report to the assembly on all of those modifications. So this is, covers everything that was done, I believe, from August to December, which I realize is more than a quarter. But this is the first report that I put together, and I just kind of wanted to see, would the committee like more information, less information? Is this what you were envisioning when you passed that requirement?
only information that's missing are the dates of action that would be up there.
Okay.
It just seems like normal type of development when you start a small business. Things change from what the original plans were, and so you always have to make small modifications as you go along, so you can maintain profitability.
And there have been a number of cases where, once these businesses get up and running, they realize, hey, we kind of don't like, having the cash register right here. We want to move it over here. We kind of want to take down this partition wall and expand this room a little bit. And if they're not increasing the licensed premises by more than 20%, then more stuff can be done administratively. And that's where the majority of these are.
How long did it take you to put this in?
Not very long. I keep all these in a separate folder, so it's pretty easy for me to go through these and just kind of, as we go and as they get approved, I just add them to the list.
I think it's useful. My takeaway is, not much. Their business is doing what business is doing, not in a huge way, and we have significant ones named here.
I just have a question. The original case numbers that are here, meaning the request for minor modification doesn't give any case number or a case number for that request. Do you just add it in the original case number for the application?
That's a good question, Dean. The original case number is listed, but they all do get a new case number as well, so that could be an addition I could put on here as well.
One thing that more so than just that it seems like things are going pretty easy is that these changes coming before us gives the department some comfort knowing that they have presented it and no one can say you didn't look at it. And so I think there's a really good standard that this will come before us because it provides protection to everybody.
So does this go in one of our packets as a information item?
It probably goes in AIN.
Okay, so this kind of, okay. And when will this come to this?
Probably the next available assembly meeting. They just like a scheduled form. Since it's an AIM, it's pretty straightforward and easy to get it on the agenda.
Okay, so would you redo this and add the date of the action?
Yes.
I don't want to put a whole lot of work on it, correct? Okay, so I think this is probably adequate for now. Yeah. But go into in the future, just add those.
Yeah, it won't take me too long to go back and get those dates of action. I'd rather have more information, just have one, good template to work off of in the future. That's
We want only the information.
Yeah.
This is the facts, ma'am.
When these applications get down to 15 pages of gold.
Chris.
Oh.
Actually, Dean had a question first.
I just have one other question. These are all approved, so there's no requests that were denied. Is that my understanding? You wouldn't report ones that were denied to
I believe all approved modifications need to be reported, but ones that were denied as well, I would just, for clarity, put on this report as well. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Why would they be denied?
They could be told that it's
Have we had
major.
one, Ryan?
We haven't had any get
Right,
denied.
but that's what I mean, like if this were denied, they say, hey, we can't make this decision here, you have to go before the whole body.
But then it would just come to us to be a different process.
Yeah.
You get somebody who does 19.5%.
But you still need to be notified of the planning director's decision per code.
Right.
So my question was a process question. This was put into code at the request of Mr. Trainee, who's not here today, and I think it serves his original purpose, which is I just want to be aware of these things as they happen. The process question for us is these are quarterly reports, and they would be delivered to the assembly via AIM, like we do with our audits or any other mandatory reporting tools. Do you necessarily want it to come to you before it's put on the body's agenda, or do you just want us to put these on as quarterly reports like we do with audits and sunset studies and revenue reports and other stuff that nobody reads.
Skip this meeting.
Okay. I'm pleased to hear that.
So skip this meeting.
Okay.
That's your question?
That's my question, yeah. Do you want us to skip this, or do you want this to be the venue where it's presented by staff and comments are made by this group, and then we put a finalized product on the agenda?
That sounds pretty good, actually.
Okay.
Skip this meeting.
To skip this meeting, that's what he's
Well,
saying.
you know, if it just went in there and we see it, we can pull it for discussion here, we can discuss it here. And it's not something that has a time deadline on it. So that would be the first, instead of this being the first step, that's the first step.
Okay.
If we see something surprising to us, we could bring it for discussion here. It would just stay and save time at this meeting, save staff time. I'm okay with it, just
Go straight, okay.
That's
good, as long as we do have the ones that were denied on that list. Right, because I imagine that you may have some applicants that want to be heard if they were denied. Say, hey, why was this denied? It gives them an opportunity, so as long as that list does contain those denials, it would be fair.
Is that, they need to go in code, or is this a policy?
It can be handled sort of internal policy. We haven't had any of these get denied to date. I've rejected an application, but that's just because they were trying to do something that building safety would have never approved. It was unoccupiable space that they were trying to expand into. So that's kind of outside of the special needs permit, it's a building safety issue. But I didn't, in good conscience, want the applicant to pay the planning department $425 just to hear a rejection.
What's your sense on that?
Yeah, that's a different issue. I think that building code issue safety is a whole other matter that we aren't really dealing with here. So we'll let the building safety people do that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So we just put in the regular assembly packet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, we'll do that.
So D is process for setting public hearings regarding marijuana license. And Ryan, do you want to recap? You had a good email that summarized one issue. Maybe that can pass around.
I only have one copy that wasn't sort of this needed to be distributed. I think the case we were discussing today, but I can read it aloud. And I believe this is in regards to Hollywood 907. There was a individual or a couple that had testified when that case was heard on November 21st that they were not notified when that decision made was going to be. So this is just a good summary of exactly how that happened. Hollywood 907 retail case 2017-0106 was originally scheduled to go before the assembly on November 7th, but the applicant pursued a postponement of the case to buy time for them to find a solution to the concerns raised by assembly members during the November 2nd Economic and Community Development Committee meeting. Staff working on this case were under the impression that this case was being postponed until December 5th and passed that information to a concerned citizen, which is most likely the same citizen who testified at the assembly hearing on the 21st. After the November 2nd Economic and Community Development meeting, however, case 2017-0106 was not officially postponed, but rather had the public hearing continued until November 21st. At the November 21st assembly meeting, the applicant had found a satisfactory solution and chose not to petition the assembly to continue the public hearing further until December 5th. The assembly then voted to approve the retail license and slept on November 21st. The planning department was not required to renotice this case because it was not postponed. In the middle of all this, a separate manufacturing license in SLUP, case 2017-0125, was scheduled to go before the assembly on November 21st, but that case was officially postponed until December 5th. And that case was approved on December 5th. So because the retail special land permit was not officially postponed, there was no official notification sent out that that case was postponed, since it was just public hearing simply continued.
Dave?
No, I think we always try to provide the public with as detailed information as possible. And I think what happened in this particular situation was that the timing of everything was perfect for a problem. The person who testified at the assembly meeting had called the fire department. The fire department provided them with the best information we had available at the time, which subsequently changed. And it's unfortunate that happened, but we were providing them the information that we had available to us at the time. So that's basically what happened.
It seemed to be when we were talking about the postponement, and that we had some discussion about, do we have to notice it? Okay, we postpone it. You have to. At the public hearing, you don't have to. There was some
Well, I think yes, that's true. The person who testified that had an issue with it had called the fire department, and we had said, there's a strong likelihood that it'll be postponed until such date, only to find out that there was a resolution thereafter that allowed it to go forward as scheduled. And unfortunately, we didn't have the contact information for that person to get in touch with them and let them know that things had changed. So there was, it's a tough situation. We wish we could change it, but it happened. So.
Well, I think, that happened. How do we prevent it? Was that, or at the assembly level, did we need to be more clear and then let you know what we did?
It's tough because, technically speaking, no, you didn't have to renotice it, and you followed, all the appropriate steps. How do you prevent this from happening in the future? I don't know that I have a great answer. It's just one of those one-off situations where, perhaps it wasn't preventable. Just the timing of it all.
Some little things on the margins that we can do is staff can say, call us back in a week in case things change, or can I send you a link to the municipal meetings webpage so you can check the agenda for yourself? We can give some options for those people who are interested, and we as planners can do that to cover ourselves from this situation happening again.
We could say that there's a strong likelihood that it will be postponed. However, it hasn't been formally done yet. So something like that. But I think just the timing of that, it happened at the perfect, it was a perfect storm, so to speak.
So, I chafe a little bit at the idea that there was even a problem. The public hearing that we had, that we opened, that we closed to postpone the meeting, would not have opened a public hearing again for them, right? Because we had opened and closed the public hearing. And so we moved to reconsider and open the public hearing again so that the public would have an opportunity to speak when the matter came back again. So if you go back and listen to the records, what we in fact did was double the opportunity for public hearing. And so while I hear y'all can have a better process, I don't think anybody needs to fall on their sword for this, because really we doubled the needed public input. And we did it in an extraordinary manner. We motioned to reconsider, open the public hearing again, continue. So that was the method that we did, and I just don't feel bad. And I'm sorry for those folks that they missed the opportunity, but they would have missed it in any case, because once we closed that public hearing, it was closed. So that's just my opinion on the matter, but I think y'all did a good job, and it was a technical issue more than anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think if you have someone that is planning to protest a license or testify against a license or something, we need to communicate to them that it's always a fluid situation. Things can be postponed. Need to stay on top of it and be ready for possible schedule changes. And that shouldn't be our responsibility for us to keep track of the schedule changes for them to make the complaint. If they're really serious about making a complaint, they should take the responsibility to keep track of the schedule themselves. That's just my opinion.
My experience too is people are more effective at testimony if they wrote to us, and then they come and they speak and they say, as you saw in my email, X. And I've always recommended this to people, but it is one thing for you. It's a fluid situation. We don't know for sure, so email all the assembly members what you think, and then also come to the public hearing. But that might, because he could have written to us, we would have the information maybe a week early, 2 weeks early, who cares? We still have it, so. But that would help.
Sure.
Because, I think whatever the process is, people don't know. Council of Public, open, expand, this is all gibberish to people. They just want to talk to us, and we have to be sensitive to the reality of people on the streets, So I don't know that you did anything wrong, but it's important. Here's someone who came, a sensible guy, wanted to talk to us, and it's the opportunity. But what we do is just, we're at the front row, so we can almost pay attention to what's going on, So anyway, I appreciate that. I think it's always worth looking at. And you did. It was a good story. It was one of those things. But do recommend to anyone, even if you want to testify, send something to Ryan.
Yeah.
Fully written email, so.
Yeah.
Okay, any more on this?
I was going to mention something. I believe that in the planning department, we try to keep up with what's happening. I haven't seen the meeting. I think that the clerk's office is more on top of the results of the meeting, if something's continued and so forth. The day after they got, I guess, an action agenda, it's clear, they maybe have more up-to-date information. It might be helpful, if we're uncertain to refer people to call the clerk's office. What happened to that item last time? Last meeting, we have exactly what actions taken, if it's continued or postponed, or you're open or closed to that in a notation. I think I would do it. Is that correct, Mandy? On action agendas? Is that the kind of information we would have there? If that's extended
Yeah, and they have
from the meeting.
the pre-agenda meetings, so there's kind of an understanding of what the intent is.
Okay, well, that's something to pass the buck. So, okay, any more? Well, thank you. So, moving on to old business, we have, 2017-175S. Do we have some people, Ron, have you seen it, Justin, do you think, are there copies here?
Yeah.
So are you guys familiar with what we've been doing on this? Give me a try. This is, I think, really comes from a number of issues planning's discovered over time. So they address some of the things in here. And then when it was presented, others had thoughts. So we have a number of amendments on a couple of the issues in here that we'll be discussing. And a lot of this has been very active, I think, in the last month or so with emails and discussion. And my understanding is kind of the issues we have remaining on this is one is a phrasing issue. Ron, pay attention. Do we say measured in a straight line, as the crow flies, and just tightening up that language. There's also an issue with correcting what looks like an oversight in the old code section of the marijuana law for downtown. Discussion had actually begun on hiding security plan information, but then the break-in at Danish Gardens heightened some of the interest in that, so we have to have that as an issue. And then a case we had at our last meeting brought up allowing extraction for manufacturing in Beach 3, and there's a couple variations on that. So I think those are the 4 key issues. Is that right, Dean?
I think so. That sounds right to me.
Okay. Then that was the email I sent. So, let's, we have a preference on where we start. I'm thinking the extraction has, or a straight line. You want to talk about the straight line version? You have that.
Let's do the straight line first, because we have 2 of the other ones.
Extraction has through measuring language has the S version. Okay, so on measuring I'm sorry, we don't start with the measuring. Okay. So this is amendment 3. Dean, would you let's start with the distance measurement phrasing. Dean, do you want to present where we are with this?
Yes. Yeah, sure. So, several places there's separation distance from protected land uses. 21, 5, 23, 25, right? Sorry, 21, 5, 54. So, we had before language, just as measured from the lot line 01 establishment directly to include this lot line, and that was in A2, A, and B. I'm going to page 5, and kind of just put out this language to be like that for like instance. So that was current code, and we did the original ordinance and planning had recommended on be a straight line in reading directly. And I just made a point that in some other places in Title 21, in other contexts like adult oriented establishments and telecom towers, typically don't use a straight line directly, so that means exclude from the outline of this outline for protected use, and generally that means like the shortest distance you can find between the outlines, however oriented they are. So I thought adding language that is supposed to mean the same thing but worded differently might be a little mitigation risk. And so that's why I suggested that we try and make this similar to what I saw in other code provisions. So I kind of backtracked a little there, and I think I mentioned this. So I think the planning's language would work, and what I suggested would work. I think what I suggested, just using exclude, at least exclude from use outline, is maybe just a little more insulated from a legal argument that if you say something in one place in the ordinance differently in another place, must be different things. That's an argument you see often. But I don't think so that could arise if we use different language here, 21. But it's not a real strong argument, which is why I think planning's way would work as well. I like my way, planning likes their way, and I don't think in the end result of it all, whichever you say, it's not going to make a big difference in the ordinary course of processing applications, and it just might make a difference. It's possibly far off again that there's litigation over this language, and some clever lawyer decides to pick apart the difference in the wording here and now. So that's why I suggested, and we'll put in the S version just simply saying without extra language about straight line, correct, X speech and correct names. So that's in the S version that you got on that page 5. And the amendment number 3 simply just goes that change from the original ordinance to this version goes back to the original ordinance, using what planning wanted for separation distance language. And so I like my language, I'm comfortable with it. Just recommend planning's language. And no hard feelings, we have a nice discussion about this all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this, it says applicants who have initiated a state of Alaska marijuana license on or before January 1st, 2017 are exempt from this provision. So we're grandfathering licenses in that were started before January 1st, 2017. Are we sure we don't want to say January 1st, 2018?
This is for that 200 foot that we added.
The 200 foot?
Yeah, the initial go was at 200 feet, so anyone before that.
Okay.
So that's not new. That's just how it's
Okay. Thanks.
Ron?
I would just tell you should do the shortest distance between two properties rather than this way, because I could pick a property line over here to the closest over here and get a different measurement each time. Because it just says from the lot line of the marijuana establishment, what lot line, what location, where, that just leaves ambiguity. And it should just say the closest distance to two property lines, shortest distance between two properties.
So if you're using that least, use the shortest distance you can find between points on the lines, that's what
It doesn't say shortest distance, it just says property line to the closest property of another one. The closest lot line. I think it should be property line to the shortest distance between two property lines.
I think that's what at least means.
Just think. You don't have to, just.
No, appreciate that. I think the issue here really boils down to kind of legal defensible language that Dean is very familiar with, and then simple understanding at the desk. And the fear of planning is we say measured, well, they're reading all this stuff and they go, oh, walking distance, that's measured. And that was your fear of confusion.
Yeah.
We want clarity at the desk, probably primarily overall, so everybody in the industry knows what's going on. But should someone challenge something, we want to be defensible too. So,
And if I can just comment, Dean, the consistency aspect that you're talking about is what we try to achieve. However, we also have to be able to implement it, and that goes back to what John was saying. When we're reviewing this, are we gonna get an argument where somebody talks about the shortest practical pedestrian route? And that's why we feel that via straight line is the appropriate language.
fine?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, also, the original intent behind via straight line was to kind of clarify terminology because we had measured directly, we had measured as a crow flies, then a short practical pedestrian route. And there is also language, and it had passed these concerns on to Dean, and Dean and I discussed this as well, but subsection E of 2105, 055 says, except in zone districts established by Chugaki River in chapter 2110, the separation distance required in subsections 2C and 2D as well shall be measured by shortest practical pedestrian route from the main entrance to the proposed establishment 2D, and then it lists a whole bunch of things. But because it's clarified on how that's supposed to be measured.
Sorry, what page are you on? Are you on?
That's 5 and 6.
That's version page 5, starting on line 45.
Yeah, thank you.
Because it's specified in this subsection further down, there was concern that somebody could apply that to subsections A and B above and challenge us in our measurements. So that's why it's saying the via straight line. It's via straight line. It's not just practical pedestrian route. And it would just be easier to communicate.
I'm thinking on Dean's argument, not as a lawyer, but, you want phrasing consistent throughout your code. But the marijuana section is so different from other things that we do, where we talk very clearly about how do you measure shortest pedestrian route, and we have all this business about it's an arterial, et cetera, and so on. That it really seems to me to set that section out as something different than other parts of the code. And if I think we went to a court, they would say, well, this is different, we treat it different.
Like I said, I thought that I was more concerned when I first spotted this issue. I was less concerned recently when I was developing informed and beginning to consider because just as you said, the marijuana ordinances are pretty much separate sections from the rest and are passed and separately from the rest of Title 21. So you can make that argument that we're using different language here on marijuana ordinance, and we don't need to compare it to what language is used for separation distance in other parts of Title 21. So that's the other side of the argument. And I think both have legitimate points. So how would a court decide the question you're asking? And how would definitely the court say this? But you have good arguments either way.
Yeah, I think that my tendency in this case is to go with the planning department because on a regular basis, they're the ones that have to actually deal with this. And the extraordinary case of this matter going to the courts would be rare, and then we would, if we found ourselves losing it, make it comply, which is probably a pretty minimal need, but like every day or at least every week of that calendar we saw, these people have to actually implement what we're saying. And so my tendency is to say, let's go with what the planning department says to make it more flexible for the people that actually have to deal with it.
When we discuss this at the assembly level, is there a phrasing we can use to leave legislative history so it's clear that we, reason we are saying it's a straight line?
I'm sorry.
Well,
Again, something for the legislative history about using.
Right, is there something we could say at that meeting to highlight this, is our intent with this is different because, whatever project comes up.
Right.
Well, yeah, the way I see, we do that, want to go with planning's language, one of you, like Mr. Constant, removing amendment number 3, and then you state your intentions and have a deliberation where you would say, yes, I understand that that's what it's supposed to do. Whether we adopt it or not, we need a straight line, shortest distance you can find between the lot lines and the straight line narrow, lane, disregard, stuff like that. Say that on the record, that's much the interest of the
So I think on this issue though, we have an amendment that will go forward. And we'll discuss it. Do we want to make a recommendation to the committee here?
I think it's reasonable, we can do it either way, I would be happy to move this amendment. I'm curious if maybe, in fact, well, I don't know if the purpose statement actually gets incorporated into the record permanently. That's in the AO or the amendment here, but we could even state that. We find that it's difficult to measure similarly to other parts of the code, and so this stands alone. Right, the intent is here, right there in black and white, it could go. But I would be happy to move this, just because, again, trying to make it easier for the people who have to deal with this on a daily basis is the most logical path for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, a couple, we don't submit it by, you want the 3 of us on?
Yeah, sure.
Can we do that?
Sure. So.
And then, just an edit, the changes here say as measured via straight line, I think we want a straight line. Not consistent. Just an edit.
There's also a slight grammatical issue.
Needs to see a straight line.
On the back page, 1A, as measured by a straight line, the lot line of the marijuana establishment to the lot line of the protected line. I just think it might be
To the.
yeah. Or from the lot line to the lot line. It's missing a word there.
Yeah, good. Get that.
So that's the technical amendment.
It's just the word from.
Yeah, let's get it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think we.
Yeah, the straight line in the top here. Straight line. And that means you push the big
Okay, so with those changes, I'm gonna recommend approval. And move that in, we'll run it in. You wanna make the motion when it comes out?
Yes, sir.
So for people in the industry who are here, are you following what we're talking about here? So this will be open for public hearing on Tuesday, this whole S version, with the amendments we're talking about. But if you have some thoughts, like if you can provide, if you think it's unclear, check with, might want to talk with planning staff a bit, and then you can certainly bring that up or email us prior to the meeting.
Just one thing real quick, well, 2 things, I'm sorry. One, what is the measurement? Is it Google Maps? Is it a surveyor? What is your mechanism? There is no mechanism here. There is no, anybody can take Google Maps and, oh, here's our 200 feet. So I don't see a mechanism for measuring these properties. The other thing is like straight line works, great, fine, but what if there's a building in between? Like how are you gonna actually get a straight line between your properties? So like, I don't know, like, I know you guys have probably done a lot of work on it, but I still think like shortest distance between property lines makes more sense. I don't know, like, I could be way off here, but it's just, like, there's no mechanism, so anybody could be like, oh, I measured it this way, and you'd have to prove that they didn't measure it right, which that's not cool. Just like, you guys want me to have a parking calculation, well, it should be a surveyed measurement then, or something, there should be some kind of mechanism to actually measure it. And two, you guys want to clean it up to argue, I would argue straight line, because I would just pick my lines on the properties and be like, here's my straight line. Shortest distance between property lines, it's, I don't know, it just seems simpler, it just seems not as confusing.
Well, it's not always property lines, though. It can be door to property line and so on. There is a variety there. But specifically, you brought there with your little reel and roll or whatever. We don't generally have a code to technique use, do we?
Correct, yeah, we're not gonna specify you need Google Maps version 9.146.
So how do you know the line?
We confirm it.
Oh, okay, so you guys actually go out and measure yourself.
We measure with the wheels for back of pedestrian now. When it comes to measuring straight line distance, we have the municipal mapping tools that are available to public and show parcel lines.
And they're fairly detailed as well.
And they're detailed and they're very accurate. I mean, every time I've taken a measurement with that software and gone out and measured each person, it's always within quarter two.
Fair enough. I was just thinking as an argument factor on your side, you don't want to have them be like, no, it's only 100 feet. And you'd be like, no, it's really 200 or whatever.
Sure, I appreciate it. We've gotten into the weeds like that. Talking the shortest pedestrian route, we were really into it. So I appreciate that, and it is important that you guys know what we're talking about when you go to the counter. We want to make it clear. Bruce,
Yeah, just as a sort of a general observation, take it or leave it. As a practicing architect, I found it difficult at times to get anything built in Anchorage, more so than a lot of other jurisdictions where I've worked, and that has not gotten better over time. And listening to this discussion, I find myself asking, is this about preserving and protecting public safety, public interest, or is this about administrative convenience, or some combination thereof? And I think that I would urge the members to consider that very clearly and answer that question before proceeding with any amendments of regulation, because that really defines a philosophy. Are we pro-business, whether it's marijuana or any other, or not? And it's disturbing sometimes for me to hear these conversations, because, as I said, it's difficult to get anything built in Anchorage, and that is not going to be better over time. And I kind of worry that we're going even further down the rabbit hole on a daily basis.
I think in this we had as a crow flies, measured, maybe straight line. We have several different phrasings in here for the same thing. So this started just tidying up, I think, is that right?
Correct, yeah, we had, as the crow flies, the industry shot back at that and said, frozen fly and straight line. So what we're doing here is clarifying it, making it more transparent for the industry. We are not doing anything to make this more burdensome on the industry. There's many holes that we had noticed in code over time in implementing these regulations that we're cleaning up with this AO, or that version of the AO. So I would strongly disagree with your statement that by this AO is somehow placing more burdens on the industry.
And I think that if I might, that you are making a general statement, and I believe that in this specific case, Brian is in some ways absolutely on point, that everything that I see that we're doing here is a streamlining of the process that's been laid down, or adding some way to make it more efficient for the operators. So, at least since I've been on the body, there hasn't been one conversation, even with some of the members who came out pretty strongly against the industry, to make things more difficult. And I would have a problem if we did.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and what I'm seeing that this 175S is we're just cleaning up some language to try to make it more easily understood and consistent. I'm hoping that the motivation behind this, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's
Thank you.
more than cleaning up, because our next two amendments are actually changing the way that the industry operates in the city and allowing new use in the B3 district that wasn't previously allowed. And so, again, we're here to try to make the economy work better.
These amendments aren't in 175S yet, so, yes, we'll see.
Yep.
Okay, so let's look, you wanna look at the extraction?
So do you want me to start off on that piece first?
Yeah, these.
So, yes, I'm off the coach, so, instruction code, district manufacturing, for product manufacturing, district codes have editors only, but it doesn't talk to our teaching that, there's a lot of manufacturing, it doesn't engage, dangerous extraction processes that we allow in the EP district as well, not just additives. I guess we also need marijuana concentrate extraction processes that are dangerous. So, Mr. Yao and I, I found the best thing to do is referring to extraction processes that are allowed marijuana manufacturing establishments in the state of Alaska. The state has regulations that, and I have not distributed as well. 3AC 06555. So, subsection B, the first B in sentence says marijuana product manufacturing facility may create marijuana concentrates only as follows. 1, 2, 3, those are the three methods that categories of methods that extraction processes are allowed in the state. So what we did in the core language was limited to just editors, which wouldn't be using or manufacturing concentrate, but maybe using the concentrate product and mixture or so forth. That's my understanding, and I'm no expert in technical aspects of this, but I can read this regulation and see that it would tie into what we're trying to do in the EP district and change from restricting only animals to something else. So what we came up with, I guess, with the Exhibit A table in the S version is only extract marijuana concentrate production by using water-based, food-based methods, not including solvents or gases. So there's a couple of ways, I guess, that we can approach this. And this language is saying we're allowed to do these processes in state regulation. We can go from the other side and say these processes allowed in state regulation are prohibited in the EP district. So a permissive approach or a prohibitive approach. I'm not really sure the pros and cons of one or the other. But the real question here, I think, is how far do we want to go in allowing different types of extraction processes in the P3 district? So that's why we have two findings. So let's see. The one in the S version, it allows I need to refer to the regulation. So S version.
Just for people keeping track of it, we have an S version that added, we took some of the information out of the text and put it as a footnote into table 2105-1, which is the same information. So essentially it was the same information added as a footnote instead of in the body. Then we added, so this is in the back, Exhibit A. So it's the very last page.
No, there's an A.
Oh, there's an A. So there, and then we got into discussion at an assembly meeting about allowing extraction in B3. So we added some phrasing in that footnote to allow extraction. So that footnote changed for a couple reasons. Then we have two amendments, Amendment 1 and Amendment 2, which would reword what's in that footnote. So we have some moving pieces here. One change in the initial S version of this, or initial version of this ordinance was just to consolidate stuff in the footnote. Then we started looking at extraction. So we have three versions, the one in the footnote and the S version you have, then each of these two amendments. And they just allow a little something different. And when I sit here, I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about it to really say which is best. So I think we have industry people here who can speak on it. So I'm going to let Gene continue, and then we'll go around. So, all right, thank you.
So John, there are basically
All right.
three language choices on the table now. Is
Yeah,
that what you're saying?
Three choices on the table. That would be a fourth, but
What's that?
email.
Oh boy.
So the first choice in our version is a principle which will allow more than 200 regulations as well as D&E. And I guess this is where the industry's expertise might be helpful. It's better use this principle approach or one which is using the prohibited approach and prohibits the methods in B3 and C. So just kind of a different way in the S version, prohibiting specific methods and allowing any others that are regulation. I guess that's helpful if the state amends regulation or the marijuana control board adding a subsection F or G with some other extraction methods and what it is in the future. Then this prohibition, we can still allow those new methods if we use what's in the current S version. You have to amend that in our code to add the definition that's new in regulation if it changes in the future. So that's one thought on those two approaches. So the third approach I have here, amendment number 2 in this document. Just instead of referring to B3 as a whole, it refers to specific processes that are in regulation at B3. So B3 has a bunch of things. Solvent-based marijuana concentrate. So any solvent-based method would be prohibited in 2 versions and 2 earlier versions of it. So in this third version, only the ones that are produced using hydrocarbons in butane, as propane or heptane, which are on the reg. Those are just named specifically here in this third amendment number 2, as well as a closed loop gas extraction system. So this would allow, I think, the solvents, toxic solvents spit out butanes that we were concerned about may explode. So this amendment number 2 might allow some a few more extraction processes in our other 2 versions. So do we want to go that far and allow perhaps maybe toxic chemicals in the extraction process, but not the butanes or pressurized closed system? So that would just be going a bit further what's allowed in the B3 district.
Yeah, what I've heard from members of the community is that they are interested in having a carbon dioxide closed loop system allowed in the B3 if we agree to that. And the simplest way that could be achieved with just what's in the S version is where it reads not employing solvents or gases. It could be amended to read not employing solvents or flammable gases. And then leave the closed loop out of the thing altogether, which would allow that as long as it's done legally, right? And so if the concern is explosiveness and flammability, then I think the simplest path is neither of these amendments, but in fact just one word, flammable, before the word gases that's in the table, that's in the S version.
The entire audience raised their hand.
Starting to track.
Okay. I'll just go down from the left. Justin.
So CO2 technically can't list as a hydrocarbon because they don't have it in a hydrocarbon class, but it is. It's not flammable, but it is under 3,000 to 6,000 psi. So if it explodes, you have an explosion. Right? So I would not allow any closed loop system in a B3 property. That would just my recommendations, because still, there's several reasons why I don't run CO2. One of them is I don't want my employees around those pressures. Butane, yes, it is flammable, but I'm working with 24 PSI. So, yeah, pop factor, unless there's gas or a spark in that room, even if I did have a pop-off, it's not gonna hurt anybody. A 3,000 or 6,000 PSI explosion in a room, it's gonna knock out walls.
Thank you, Chris.
I must disagree slightly, somewhat with Justin. I guess in considering this, clearly this is a public safety issue, and everybody can support that. I guess the question I would ask in considering this is, does this occupancy allow for companies that cater to scuba diving? They've got compressed oxygen, compressed air, compressed nitrogen, I believe in some cases. Those are potentially volatile or explosive compounds. Welding facilities, an automotive repair facility, a paint booth for cars or aircraft. These all use compressed gases that are highly volatile, and the building codes address that. The building codes put all of these uses into a category that is very restrictive. There's strict electrical requirements, there's exiting requirements, there's fire suppression requirements. Those things already address the public safety component of this discussion. So I would urge you not to go too far down the road dealing with this from a zoning question, when in fact the building codes do deal with it.
I agree with what you just said in the sense that the building code requires it. As a mechanical engineer, and I've certified several of these extraction systems and different things throughout Anchorage and throughout Alaska. There's criteria that's in the state statute. There's criteria in the city ordinances. There's engineering that goes in. These are listed devices. CO2 is not flammable. Yes, they're high pressure, but in all of my research and dealing with all of it to be able to put these letters together, I haven't seen the explosion on a CO2 listed system. So if we find one, it'd be interesting to find and read what happened, because I don't think it gets to that level. These have safety pop-offs. They have the listed devices. They're completely UL listed. And so I think what we're looking at is CO2 closed loop system is one of the safest of what we're dealing with out there. From my research, I've certified ethanol, I've certified the CO2, and out of all of them, the ethanol, I got to put in a 6 air change per hour ventilation system, class 1 div 2 electrical system in that room, explosion proof motors. Then we certify and say, hey, we've met that. CO2 needs none of that. The CO2 does end up getting a class 1 div 2 rating in the room, but you just have to put the plugs up at 4 feet and you end up calling it good. We still have to certify all of those devices, all those installations as per the building code and all of the requirements. They do have to be completely third-party UL tested, like most appliances that go in. We do commercial compressors that we get certified that go into large structures as well in B3. So, I think that just trying to tell you as a person that certifies them, I think you can feel comfortable that a CO2 system in a B3 is okay. We're putting them in I1s, we're putting them in I2s, we're putting CO2s in all those areas as well. An explosion is an explosion, and so we're trying to cover that, and that's what that special hygienist and the special engineer has to certify, that they're not going to be explosion with all the systems in place together. And so I feel like in my research that I've done in the last year on this, is I feel the CO2 isn't acceptable in the B3, just like it's acceptable in the I1, I2. I think the code change already includes the ethanol system, which requires the 6 air changes and the additional. So to include the CO2, I think is a fair and sound engineering background and listing background to feel safe enough that this is not going to be a problem.
Thank you. Are you transportation meeting? Okay, so we have a meeting at City Hall, which, how long do you think you get there, 11 and a half minutes?
Yep. So,
Yeah, right.
just coming back to our previous conversation, then are you required to stamp these plans as they're being approved?
If I'm doing a mechanical engineer
Yep.
needs to design the system around what goes in. So yes, you're required to stamp it. Now, in addition to the stamping of the drawings, you have to provide a certification letter with regard to any possibility of explosion. So we're putting our license saying, no, there is no possibility in this installation with this. With the, remember, that's with all the best engineering practices that are available to us today and the listings and everything. We cover all those listings, and as long as they're all in there, then I have no problem signing my name to the bottom of the letter that certifies that. So not only are we designing them, mechanical engineers are usually the ones doing the stamping of the certification of the non-explosion hazard that's in place. And it involves with different systems have different requirements, both mechanically and for electric.
Okay, thank you. Dean?
I think I'm curious, we're looking at Title 21, but the building code in Title 23, and I'm not extensively familiar with it, but I understand it has requirements for structure. It's going to be used as an auto repair shop for gas stations, stuff like that, and structural requirements and make it safer for everyone. But I don't think that we have anything similar building code for a structure that's got a house, marijuana manufacturing, extraction processes.
The code covers all of those areas. The code covers the type of use. The fire department has determined that these are F1s. We go to the F1 standard for all of those. If it has flammable liquid, you go to the H if you're over the volume of the hazardous liquid. So all of the codes are in place for that. We limit, in an ethanol system, for instance, we limit that to 50 gallons, 50 to 60 gallons, I think, is the number that you can have in the space. You can only transfer it in 5-gallon chuck. All of those things are in the fire code, building code, and yes, they're addressed on every one of them. And they're addressed in the explosion-proof letter and all of those type of things.
Thank you. Anything else? I think the staff, whoever's smart, at some point, extraction of B3 simply wasn't allowed. Now we're saying, well, maybe we should some. Why was it not allowed initially?
Because I think you want to take it, Ryan?
Sure. Initially, when all the regulations were being drafted, two years ago and further back, marijuana manufacturing was saw as an industrial use, and therefore this, by that rationale, shouldn't be allowed in the district. The only reason that we came back to it, stating that in some instances it should be allowed in B3, is the fact that commercial food production and bakeries are commercial food production is a conditional use in the B3. Bakeries are allowed, permitted by right in B3. So there are many parallels to, depending upon what products the marijuana manufacturing facility is producing, they may essentially be functioning as a bakery. But if they're using more industrial scale practices and making different extracts using butane, ethanol, even supercritical CO2, that kind of puts them in this gray area. Are they really truly industrial, or are they more like commercial food production? So,
okay.
Yeah, in the regulations, seems to me that we want water-based and food-based solvents are very much like a bakery type of process, right? We're using water to agitate, nothing else there. It's just the B3 extraction processes that seem to be concerns that have regulations.
And for Dean, I let Forrest know that we'll be late, so if you're late, you have a throw on that committee too, so I told him we would go long. Okay, so we gotta move on this pretty quickly, so very briefly.
Yeah, Ron is right, and I do agree with those guys that the equipment is right and the sound. Then my question to these guys and Ron would be, if it is a CO2 system in that facility, if it is in another building with other rooms, does that CO2 room have to be completely sealed? Meaning, if there's a leak in that CO2 system, CO2 is a deadly gas. So how are the rest of the building and the occupants in the rest of that building safe from that CO2 gas that's leaking?
Just to go on with CO2. CO2 is alarm. It requires alarms at every door. CO2 is a fixance that it takes the oxygen out of the air if it loses. So, and that's the OSHA allows 55,000 parts per million in an 8-hour environment. So typically they set the alarm somewhat below that level so it doesn't asphyxiate you. So no, they don't seal it, but they have alarms on everything. We're putting in CO2 alarms on every room that has a bottle type CO2.
Makes
So
sense.
it goes
I'm
on
not-
every.
I don't care about the room itself. I more care about the occupying facilities next to those rooms. Are they gonna have an alarm that go off if the CO2 is leaking into their rooms?
Just remember, just to tell you, Dempsey Anderson, CO2 refrigerant system. Sullivan Arena, CO2 refrigerant system. Van Voke, Eagle River, all of them went to CO2 refrigerant systems with alarms. All the alarms are set by code. We do it in every aspect. Those are all alarmed. These will be alarmed. That's just what you do. It has to be done. And so just to say, those are big buildings with lots of citizens in them, CO2 systems. It's better than ammonia, it's better than some of these other explosive gases.
Real quick. I'll be very brief to address Justin's question. When analyzing a building in its entirety, doing a code analysis, you're then looking at a mixed occupancy facility. The code analysis has to take into account all the other occupancies in that building. And there's accommodations that need to be made, so you cannot put a super high risk occupancy immediately leads into a very low risk occupancy without some intervening barrier of protection. So, and I'll just reiterate, the building codes are the result of decades of tragedy. And I've had this discussion with fire over and over again. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but when catastrophes happen, building officials around the country get together and go, wow, how can we keep that from happening again? That's how the building codes are derived. And there are measures in place. Are they foolproof? No, but they are well developed. So, I would just urge everybody involved in this discussion to look to the building codes for the life safety issues, zoning for others.
So, yeah.
I tend to, agree with you in that there are safeguards in place in the building code to deal with that. But I think, Brian brought up a good point. What we're trying to achieve here is to separate the general retail zoning district from what could be an industrial use. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve here. I agree there are safeguards in building code to ensure public safety, but from a zoning perspective, what we're trying to do is separate those uses that are industrial from those uses that are general retail. So.
And then just from a chemical point of view, carbon dioxide is 40 grams per mole versus oxygen is 12 versus nitrogen is 14. So when you look at that, it's a super heavy molecule compared to the other molecules, and so it's going to stay relatively isolated.
Okay, we got too much science for me. We're gonna have to. Maybe real quick, does planning have a preference amongst them? We have 3 options here. Does planning have a preference somewhere?
What did I say was my preference? We've gone round and round about it. I forget what I said. I think it was.
I think usually when you have a resolution, inclusive.
Amendment 1 or 2.
Not the amendments, but the
Yes.
resolution.
I have to go back to my email.
Allowing, just what are these?
Okay, yeah,
Thanks.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm curious about scaling of systems. Is it, because we hear about all this high pressure and we think about massive systems. Are there small scale systems that we're talking about, or are we just talking about filling a big room with a giant machine, right? Or are we talking like desktop size, or what's the scale of the function that we're talking about? Because in my imagination now, at this rate of orbitals, we're going to be driving in a machine the size of a bulldozer and compressing gas, but really, I don't think that's what we're talking about, right?
Probably about the size of that table, the footprint somewhere in that size. I mean, maybe with a cooler on the side or a freezer if it has to be super cooled or something like that. But yeah, they're not big devices. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. The question is, they can bring in 50 of those. So I mean, I can kind of see what Dave's saying. You know, maybe, you know, you limit it to 1 or 2 of them or something like that. I don't know what you end up doing, but the issue ends up being is the CO2 systems is really the ones that I've done the most research on, and they're just a appliance, like a boiler you plug in the wall and they spit out a product at the end. They're pretty simple. And so I don't see that as like a refinery or some of these industrial type uses. I mean, I don't think it is, but yet if you allow them, you might as well be ready to allow as many as they want, or as little as they want, or limit them, you know, that type of thing. So, I mean, most of these are really small little room on a big scale of things on the property. So it's a real minor little use in a 1,000 square foot room in a 20,000 square foot building. So they're not like it's the whole industrial type of use. It's a small little room producing one product, because these extraction machines make the product that you can bake, make the product that you can cook, make the product that you can put in all these devices. So that's why it's crucial for them to have it, so they can bake and make it at the same time.
So these closed loop systems, these are manufactured, they're off the shelf type of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that changes.
Well, let me rephrase that.
No, hold on. We gotta be ordered. One we're out of time. Brian, we have 2 other issues.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to kind of make a point for the discussion. But we're kind of discussing things how they are now, today. There may come a day where we have very large extraction systems, you know, that are the size of a bulldozer. I mean, if you just look at this is a different industry, but just the distilling industry, brewing industry, I mean, there was a time where those units were the size of a closet, and now they're the size of a warehouse. So, and I do acknowledge that that's a different industry, but that's why I don't want to go down the route saying how many units you can have or what the size of them has to be. I prefer not to be down in the weeds on that, and instead let's focus on the use itself and look at it from some perspective.
Right. So just to know, so we have at this point roughly kind of 4 choices: S plus phrase flammable, word flammable, and these other amendments. So I'm not hearing that we're really ready as a committee to recommend any particular thing. So this goes Tuesday. We have an S version, then we have a series of amendments. Generally, you make them one at a time, but we would want industry people to be able to know when the public hearing's open, these are all 3 in play, and comments on all 3 of them when you testify would make sense.
Dean, I hope we can work together. I'll just come up with the amendment to add that one word, a separate amendment.
The way you were talking about.
Flammable.
Flammable.
Okay. So then we'll have 3 plus the original S version.
Okay. And for people in the industry, if you're gonna organize, kind of get word out and have people comment, it does help to have emails and then have your spoken testimony reinforce your email, particularly on something like this, because guess what, I've got to listen to mole size of the chemicals I need to read. And it's all important, but that would be helpful. You know, this will come up on Tuesday. So I appreciate you guys coming on this. So can we move on to? Okay. So that was extraction. We have a simple thing. Dean had rewording in old code, which this goes to downtown. And what is what are you measuring from a video arcade? And it was unclear. And his recommendation is shortest pedestrian route. What page? I'm looking. I don't know. I just have it.
This is on page 10 of line 29. If you see right above line 29, subsection D is the video case, same speaker construct, and subsection E refers to 1D in that subsection, so that measurement is shortest pedestrian route in the downtown area, which is the same with the rest of the language as well. if we don't have that, it's possible this will be seen as the straight line measurement, which is, whether Jimmy type measurement. So how do we want out how it measures is the question. And additionally, for make sure it's safe for the rest of the ball.
Does that have anything to do with any use other than video arcades?
These only video arcades, but the Shores project please to it's also the one series and the asterisk show you with the list of those uses.
Because functionally, there are no video arcades in downtown.
So it's just clarifying.
Yeah, but it's an old business card, so it may come back someday, but I'm not holding my breath.
You don't think pinball machines are
Right.
coming back?
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want a recommendation on that?
Unless we make gambling legal, I don't imagine it happening. And so,
Recommendation?
yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go with that. Okay, so now we have, it might be a long discussion, but that is the security issue. And the security, okay, maybe. Well, we have, a couple words.
Page 3, right?
Okay, we have, one is just the new word, security plan is not required to show location or placement of security cameras in areas covered by them. Is there any issues on that? Is that Kate?
Mr. I have no objections to that. I think that that's a very good amendment. And, even in our plans, in our applications that we accept, I have applicants omit anything that shows placement of cameras. Because in municipal code, you're not required to show the placement of cameras, you're just required to demonstrate how you're going to comply with state regulations for security.
We ought to recommend that the Marijuana Control Board makes that change as well.
Okay, so do that. Now, that was, I thought would be quick. Now, just above it in double I, is new wording required floor plan. And this includes this phrase, it's arrangement of rooms. And I propose to staff deleting that phrase so that you would basically get what you, with the hope, expectation that you would get the information you need to do your parking requirements, but not provide layout that gives a burglar the map to where the good stuff is. Did you have thoughts on that?
I had two thoughts on that. First thought is, those plans are required through the building permit, which are publicly available as well. So that's another avenue, potentially something to address. But also, when code enforcement goes out to inspect these properties for the final inspection, they're verifying dimensions. They're verifying what takes place where, and that may be something, perhaps we could have one showing the depiction of rooms and one just showing outline.
What is, and I haven't done the inspection, Ryan, but what is code enforcement's, why do they have a desire to know what is happening in every room? I mean, code enforcement generally does zoning, enforcement. And to me, why do they care if one room is a nursery and another room is whatever it might be?
But I should probably clarify, not necessarily, when I say it's arrangement of rooms, not necessarily the purpose of each room, but just where partition walls are, how the space inside those.
That has more to do with the security and the cameras and all that, right?
Correct, yeah. So that the plans that were submitted approved actually match site conditions. That's the big thing, showing which rooms are where. But exactly stating, well, this is a grow room, this is a flower room, this is our safe room. That we don't necessarily need to know. But knowing room dimensions and where doors are is helpful.
Okay, so just basically, basically you don't label them, you kind of get the security issue, don't label what those rooms are.
I think all we need, as I said before, John, is just, this is cultivation. These areas are cultivation. I don't know if we need to have.
Well, it comes into play with modifications too. That's another reason why we would need interior details showing arrangement of rooms, is that if they need to shift walls or expand rooms or, take down partition walls, change access to any internal rooms. That's all required to have a modification.
They just have a floor plan and have like the doors and the walls, or they just have like the entire chunks shaded green or whatever it is, the creation. They wouldn't have to label that necessarily, they just show the outline of what it is.
Did they publish their security plans? I don't think so.
Correct.
So that would violate code enforcement fifty also.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I just had a thought, and then all of a sudden I heard it echoed behind my head. It was very weird. What do banks do? Because effectively, you know, we're creating a new set of regulatory schemes for these businesses and creating risk, proven risk now in the industry. And yet we know that there are entities in our community that do safeguard big piles of money. And we should effectively consider regulating in the same way. And I'm certain we don't require banks to publish their security plans onto the internet, right? And so I think that we may need to do some more work to get to the point where we're figuring out what the most effective means is. And we certainly don't have the time today, but it just dawned on me, literally, you guys, so weird. The same thing, I heard right behind me, we should consider what banks do, and we should do that soon.
And pharmacies, and there
Right.
are other types of.
Well, just one point with that too is that, you know, banks and pharmacies, they are publicly accessible, so people can go in and kind of scope them out. They may not know what happens behind the counter, and that's where they need some sort of floor plan or some insider knowledge. But these marijuana cultivation facilities, they're not accessible that publicly. We have had retail facilities, you know, get burglarized, and that, of course, is publicly accessible as long as you're 21. You can go in and scope it out. But I still think that there's a lot of value in not requiring an individual to submit a camera plan.
I think we're settled on that, but I think the information here is, I mean, I can look at these and go, okay, so if I go in there, this is your safe room for finished product. I guess that's where I go first, you know? I mean, so it's almost, the walls would be helpful. If you go into a dark room and you would kind of know what walls are, but that is the key thing. So maybe I'm looking for wording in here that'd be simple, this, the purpose of the rooms need not be labeled or something. I mean, they are in the state, are they required to be labeled in the state application?
Yes.
But that's their problem, we can get a step ahead, right? Okay, so
Well, my feeling is when I'm looking at this from a zoning perspective, what is the minimum amount of information possible to review it and make a recommendation to the assembly? And I don't think we need to have all that information. I think you could modify this language slightly to achieve what I think everyone wants to achieve, but what the exact language is, I think Brian and I, we should all talk about it.
can you do that and have something for an amendment on Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay, you got my email address? Chris?
I would also, again, like us to consider creating a communication to the state of Alaska regarding these matters, because while they have an abstract policy, we have on-the-ground reality, and on-the-ground reality we're having to deal with it. It's a major public safety threat that they are allowing this information to be public, because it's driving criminals to where the money is. And so we need to be preparing a communication to the state.
And we were talking about this from the beginning. One of the very first meetings we had, when we saw the first diagrams come out, we're going, wow, this is all gonna be public information. And so I'm really not surprised that criminals have caught on.
Okay, so to recap in a few seconds here is we will approve the change regarding cameras. We'll get something from staff rewording this floor plan thing to make it minimalist and protect the security. Those are the key issues in front of us. We did have a variety of emails regarding variances and how to deal with changes there. There was no real consensus among staff and it really sprung from one issue that came up, and that was the one at Burlington Code Factory, which is important. My preference is we don't have anything in front of us, to put that off till later if necessary. You know, if we have a lot of variances coming forward, maybe we need to look at it, but I'm not aware that we do.
There is one issue we may want to include in the S version, and that is the fact that there were never any variance fees codified, or it was decided in code that in current language says that shall be decided by the assembly as part of an application for a special use permit for marijuana. So I was just wondering, is it the wish of the assembly that it just be decided upon as part of the application, or should there be a variance fee associated with that? Because currently, since there isn't a defined variance fee, they would fall under the all other variance fee, which is $3,000. $3,700.
Right higher. I think we're done.
Yeah, I know, we're ahead of time.
I think the variance issues could be looked at as a big chunk thing on its own. If you want to continue with that and have that be a part of that. If that's the reason. If you want to keep working on it, I think it's not.
Could we put that on our agenda for next meeting or
Something. Or you guys part of the
Yeah, we can come up with those.
Okay, good. Covered a lot. Thank you.